In June 2015, the retired Saudi general exposed before the United States Council of Foreign Relations in the Arabic province, there's a promising oil field that will compel the countries of cooperation of the Gulf and Yemen to cooperate to protect it and protect its performance. That meeting should continue the model of the U.S. Constitution that united America and granted democracy. And I continue with the words of this general. Regarding the Ogaden field in Ethiopia, this would allow to unify the African Horn under the Ethiopian command. The bridge of Aknud that will connect the city of Aknud in Djibouti with the city of Aknud in Yemen. 3 years later, dying of hunger or of a bomb or surviving mutilated or sick is the condemnation that the Saudi monarchy imposes on its people. The privileged geographic location that is consistent with the will of power of the kingdom could continue blocking food and other basic elements. Perhaps we have an essential key in the strait of Bab-El-Madeb, oil passing. Yemen, war for oil, war for the strait. This is our critical move today. August 9th, the Arab coalition admitted having bombarded several buses that transported children in a market of the city of Dayan, north of the southern province of Sadr. 50 people died, more than half children. On October 14, the United Nations confirmed the death of 15 civilians after an attack to microbuses that were going to Padegan, West Yemen. This province has been a scenario of war controlled by the rebels. The same organization, the United Nations, alerts that there is no arrangement. Until now, the Yemeni people tried to control the country militarily, but after 3.5 years, they have lost all hope to win militarily and have launched an economic and monetary war against Yemen. Saudi Arabia and the United States that conduct the aggression against Yemen are the reason for the price increase and the systematic process against the Yemeni rial, because it is the countries that started the aggressions against the Yemeni people, their food and livelihood. The increase of prices, the enemies seek to sink our currency, but the Yemeni people will resist and oppose the arrogance. Our will of resistance is more powerful than rockets and bombs. They will never place the Yemeni people on their knees. We will remain united versus aggressions, and they will never humiliate us. At stake is a territory in front of the African Horn that is the Strait of Bab-El-Madeb and crossing of oil towards Europe. This is not only the zone of the Fifth Fleet of the United States. It has the African Horn, Central Africa, Middle East, and the South African region. Let's go to the detail of resources. War is not free. The Republic of Yemen, a bicontinental country in Middle East, its Asian part is located south of the Arabian Peninsula, borders Oman and Saudi Arabia. It's the second largest country in the Arabian Peninsula. It's one of the oldest centers of the Middle East civilization. Its capital and most populated city is Sanava. It has oil deposits that generate 25% of the GDP and 63% of state budget. It emerged in 1990 1990, after the various reunification, North Yemen was founded by partition from Ottoman Empire. In 1918, and South Yemen was born after independence from the British colonial regime. Saudi Arabia, as the leader of an international coalition, started criminal military actions against Yemen on March 25, 2015. A Washington Post report revealed that since that bombarding, 50,000 people have been murdered, 3,000 of whom were children, after daily attacks. According to UN reports, more than half of its population, that is 14 million people, are in conditions prior to hunger and depend on external aid to survive. The country is suffering its worst cholera epidemic besides the war and military. It's the world's worst cholera. The Saudi Arabia, United States, and other Western companies are unscrupulously bombarding Yemen. For 2017, only the United States claims to have committed 162 drone and missile strikes. To continue providing data, I will read what El País from Spain just published some hours ago. Sanchez supports the sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia to keep Qatar's employment, and his phrase was, "I defend Spanish interests." There was lots of expectation for the appearance of Sanchez before this journey before the Congress of Deputies in Madrid. Because of the polemical topics on the agenda, one of them was if the executive continues authorizing the sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia. Pedro Sanchez said yes, because canceling current contracts would be suspend the construction of 5 ships in San Fernando, Cádiz, for 1.8 billion euros and eliminate 6,000 jobs in the Bay of Cádiz by 2022. I defend the Spanish interest. The policy is to turn dreams into realities when he defended his position before the plenary of the Congress. And I add what Voltaire Network publishes towards a new division of Yemen. United Arab Emirates chooses the creation of a new state that will allow it to control the Yemeni region of Adem, a strategic port that is already exploited by Dubai Ports War. The position is that the new state be created in territories of South Yemen. The pro-Soviet Democratic Republic of Yemen since 1997 to 1990 later became the Democratic Republic of Yemen before the reunification. Nevertheless, above policy, tribal reasoning are imposed. That is another factor that is added to the controversial situation in this country. Now, I would like to make our recommendation found on telesur.net, published in August 2018, and written by Pablo Joffre, a Chilean journalist and international analyst, specialist in Latin America and Middle East, and specifically the Maghreb region. The aggression against the Yemeni people has exceeded all levels of cruelty conducted by ambition and hatred by Saudi Arabia royalty and the extremist vision that it supports it. The criminal actions of the Saudi regime are based on political and military goals supported in March 2015 when Riyadh started its military aggression against Yemen. They want to destroy the popular movement Ansar Allah and, together with strategic goals of their partners, imperialism, Zionism, struggle against the Islamic Republic of Iran. This, regarding the sustained support that the Persian nation has provided to the region, and that has changed relations in that region. We see how elements are adding Pedro Sanchez's Spanish position regarding regarding Spanish sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia for the war that started in 2015 in Yemen. We have the position of United Arab Emirates and the recommendation of Pablo Joffre Leal, the military and strategic goals, and how Iran is in dispute in this conflict. Hunger is one of the consequences of this war. Recent figures offered by the United Nations will be explained by Nayara Tardo. Greetings. Yesterday, the emergency aid coordinator of the United Nations alerted the desperate situation of around 14 million Yemenites in risk of a terrible hunger. The official declared between the Security Council said this was the first call he will make because the situation is getting worse. At this time, only half of the hospitals work, and many people do not have the resources to reach them, and therefore they die at home. The report assured that 130 children die in Yemen due to famine and diseases. The official alerted the international community and assured that if immediate measures are not taken, children, the elder, and the rest of the population would die due to diseases like cholera. In the midst of this terrible situation of famine and disease, the coordinator also referred to comments in Hodeida that limits the access to the port of that city when the country depends completely on imported foods, fuel, and medication. Let's remember that the port city of Al-Hodeida is the main front of war in Yemen. It is a key port for the arrival of international humanitarian aid, without which Yemen would confront the worst famine known in 100 years. The World Food Program are also demanding the end of this bombarding. This is one of the longest humanitarian crises in the world because of the conflict that confronts government forces with members of Houthi group. This crisis scaled in March 2015 with the beginning of bombardments of an anti-insurgent coalition conducted by Saudi Arabia. This coalition has performed indiscriminate attacks that have caused the death to more than 15,000 people and more than 24,000 wounded. The international community has warned that this war has placed Yemen on the side in the worst crisis of history. This is the information to this point. Thank you, Nayara, for your extensive report. And I would like to go back to one of the topics we started with. One of the keys are found on the oil passage to the west, and this takes us to a point of geography. The Strait of Bab-El-Madeb, another war for that crucial passage for oil. We leave this as a question to analyze after the pause. Let's continue talking about Yemen. To develop our hypothesis, we will go to the Hellenic shipping news under the title, How Vulnerable Are Key Oil Points in the World? There are 4 strategic points, namely the Hormuz Straits, we've talked about them, Bab-El-Madeb, Malacca, and the Suez Channel that represent 2/3 of the world traffic of oil trade. Almost 45 million barrels of oil travel daily through these points. The Bab-El-Madeb Strait, to go directly to this one, is a passage that connects the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea with the Mediterranean. It's a core point for the traffic of a little less than 5 million barrels of oil per day. But its importance is more significant by 2 reasons. First, most hydrocarbons that cross through the Suez Channel must pass by Bab-El-Madeb. In second place, at this point, it is near the war in Yemen. There is no alternatives to the Bab-El-Madeb Strait except the Saudi gasoline, and a closing of the strait would compel the oil tankers to travel towards there. Let's add other data on this crucial point. The aggression of the so-called international coalition chaired by Saudi Arabia against Yemen has its main reasons to control the Bab-El-Madeb Strait that, because of its position, calculates more than 4 million barrels of oil per day, almost 10% of the total crude moved daily, and 40% of the oil consumed by Europe. The strait, thus, is one of the main sea ways to send oil. In case of a collapse, the cost of bombarding the Buena Esperanza Cape would be very high. This is why the United States is allied with Saudi Arabia to attack Yemen. And there are not few military bases around them. For example, Djibouti, the small African country situated on the western side of the sea, has many military bases of the United States, France, Japan, and China. The main U.S. base has a U.S. Special Force, and France, Turkey, Russia, and China keep negotiations to install their operation bases. Since July 25 this year, Saudi Arabia stopped its exports after the oil banks were attacked. The officials pointed out that they will keep this attitude until the situation of the strait is safe. Next, I would like to present to you our guests to respond to some questions that arise. We have connected from us Aníbal Garzón Baeza, sociologist and international analyst from Spain. Hello, Aníbal. Regardless of appearing like reductionist in such complex topics, sometimes investigating it is hard to see through the complexity of the situation. A key, an essential key, lies on this strait we just described. Is this another war for oil? Hello, Lucia, to you and all Telesur team. Yes, as you said, the strait is very important because it's one of the main trade ports in the world. There are several. The Suez Canal, Bab-el-Madeb, or the Panama Canal, Mediterranean, are several points in the world that are part of trade, and this is one. But not only because of trade and economic matters, as you said, we shouldn't reduce the view. There's also a certain Arab Cold War in this conflict, Persian-Arab conflict. Saudi Arabia with its Western partners, United States, and an Arab coalition that invaded Yemen, and the other one is the Persian line that tells us what is happening in Yemen. the government of Hadi, supported by Saudi Arabia, and the Houthi rebels, supported by Iran, even if there is no official information of their being allied. But we know this is very important. As I said, there's a Cold War there, and the support by the United States and Europe to that invasion that Saudi Arabia has performed and is creating huge human catastrophe among Yemeni population is above all to keep Iran from generating a power in the region. For the United States, Iran is center of evil since the 1979 revolution, and they fear that the Shiite line expand in the region. Therefore, Saudi Arabia there is no report saying that the attacks are constant and they have free way to do whatever they want against the Yemeni people. This is why there is an economicist line, but also a geopolitical between both powers. If we look at the recent events and we asked you for a conclusion, are Western powers involved in this war interested in extending the conflict? And if so, what will be the destination of these people that survived the ferocious tentacles of war? Yes, there's weapons industry, a constant business in Saudi Arabia is taking most of its public deficit because of an armed conflict that generates economic income to the West. Seen from Spain here, where there's a debate on weapons that Spain is selling to Saudi Arabia. Right now there's a debate with the death of journalist Jamal Khashoggi that it seems that a death of a journalist is more than the millions of people died during this war, exaggerated. All the weapons industry, Germany said that they won't sell more weapons to Saudi Arabia. Spain said it will continue, and other United States as well. So we see this is a complex that the weapons industry is generating great fortunes to the war corporations. It is also interested in the clash between Saudi Arabia and Iran to avoid an imbalance of forces. This is also part of the imperialistic strategies. They need conflict in neighbor countries in order to keep from having a powerful development. These conflicts have been created. In the case of Yemen, a new conflict has arisen, which are the southern separatists, and this generates failed states where not oil corporations make business and weapons industry as well. It is clear that conflicts in the capitalistic world will never disappear because there's a need for money. Is there any actor in the international level that could change the situation? What would that actor have to do? Well, at present it is complex because this regional conflict that started between Iran and Saudi Arabia, an ally of Israel at micro levels in the region, and presents in the Yemeni conflict between Houthis reached international scale, and Iran has as ally Russia and China, allies because they bet on a multilateral world, while the United States and Israel have a partner in Saudi Arabia. We are currently looking at no change in this version. We see that the United States is harshening the blockade against Iran. It left the nuclear treaty. And what I believe is that there could be internal conflicts. and the sides are United States, European Union, Israel, Saudi Arabia against China and Russia. There are creating conflicts with European Union, and Saudi Arabia is creating human rights crisis. Europe is being involved with the sale of weapons, and now we just commented of the murder of this journalist murdered by Saudi Arabia, and there is we see how the European Union is saying that Saudi Arabia is passing the limit, exceeding the limits of human rights violations. This is only internal conflicts, but I don't think there will be a change of the cards or letters set internationally. Russia and China still bet on a multilateral action against the military expansion that is performing the United States and the European Union. You named journalist Yamal Khashoggi. Does the Yemen, if the Yemen war had half of what it has now, would we be talking about another thing? I think the topic of the journalist was a media boom, and it seems that we have to condemn it at all times, of course, because it's an atrocity by Saudi Arabia in Turkey, and it's consulate in Turkey, and Turkey has been offended by this violation in its territory, and we see the conflict of Yemen. This is quite high for the international opinion. So many people suffering, famine, violations. Austin Post told about figures and saying that there are more than 50,000 people died and other people displaced. United Nations says it's the worst in the last 100 years. And that has had more media impact than the journalist. This journalist was not alternative and has he was self-refuged in the United States, and I would like to know what would have happened in a critical, if the journalist would have been a critical journalist with a nationality of the South. Surely he wouldn't be reported in the media because the repression to journalists is constant. But since he was part of the media structure of the United States, he has had his first pages and will continue. He will have a movie, and many journalists are pursued for human beings and nothing happens. Do you believe that Saudi Arabia and the allied countries have achieved any goal by with this war in Yemen? I think that no, I would say no. Saudi Arabia, with its coalition of more than 10 Sunnite movements in North of Africa and Middle East, they wanted to make a quick war to control the strait and eliminate the Saudis and take the war. That quick war started in 2015 with a military coup in the short term, but what is happening is the complete reverse. They are resisting, they control the capital, it's a strait, they also have territory, and Saudi Arabia is creating an image of a weak country economically in this where it will not be able to confront rural guerrillas, the Houthis, and this seems a result of what United States happened in Iraq or Afghanistan, that it weren't able to confront the Taliban's, and they doubt all the machinery that Saudi Arabia has, and we see how the image is weakening. there's the fact that how Iran can be stronger than Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia has not been able to eliminate the Houthis. That as a negative point of the Saudi Arabia vision. Now, the positive point for the West is that Saudi Arabia is being a military client because they are taking weapons from the south of Spain, Cadiz, to Saudi Arabia that is used for the Yemeni war. The same happened with the United States and France. It is still a client, and if the local and the regional populations suffer, but the northern countries make their economic profit. Thank you very much for your invitation. We hope that the conflict is solved as soon as possible. An honor to have this international analyst that connected from Spain. It is deemed the worst world humanitarian crisis. The UN just said that the country is on the rift of a humanitarian catastrophe, according to one of the delegates of the humanitarian mission, who said we are at a point of inflection upon which the destruction or massive death of people in this country would be inevitable. Why has the United Nations been incapable of doing something? All these international organizations created for life, peace, essential rights, democracy. What happens with international treaties, the conventions of Geneva, self-determination of the people? We will make these questions to our analyst after the pause. We repeat one of the questions we made before the pause. What are international organizations doing versus violations to international law and the conventions of Geneva in the case of Yemen? A war that has caused the displacement of more than 4 million people, thousands of deaths, famine, and the destruction with prohibited weapons in the sanitary, industrial, and road infrastructure. In spite of the atrocious situation that is called one of the worst humanitarian crises, the invading governments do not stop, and international organizations make soft calls or keep an accomplice silence, as well as the hegemonic media. On November 7, 2017, the Security Council approved to reopen the port of Al-Hudaida, where 80% of food entered. Saudi government and its allies had neglected this resolution and decided not to finance that organization if it continued with its critiques because of murdering thousands of people and bombarding of strikes on schools, hospitals. Last year, the Chamber of Representatives of the United States, the House, with 63 votes in favor and 30 against, accepted not to authorize the military assistance to Al-Assad House to continue with the war crimes. Then, Democratic Senator Rod Canis by California said that an army is not authorized to assist the Saudi army to struggle against Saudis because many times Saudis have aligned with Al-Qaeda. With us, we have Carlos Rimed, international analyst from Venezuela. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your invitation. Today, the UN humanitarian head, Omar Loco, in a meeting of the Security Council, said we are reaching an inflection point after which it would be impossible to avoid massive loss of lives. Is that a call to the international community, a warning? Could that revert the situation of accomplice silence? In general, we live in a double standards in the world. International institutions, starting with the United Nations, that is being criticized for years, is being commended by imperialistic interests. There is no democracy. Well, a country like the powers that have the right of veto and is repeated continuously in the case of Cuba on the 31st, the vote against the blockade of Cuba, United States object any action that the majority of the countries of that entity demand. What is demanded in the case of Yemen? Immediately stop all war actions. And I would like to link this, what is being planned in the world. Today we have news from Yemen. Tomorrow we will have other news. And our work is to link all these news and facts around the world to find this imperialistic strategy, which is a complete domain of the world. And this is what we say: the case of the genocide of Yemen and the attempt of destruction of Venezuela are two faces of the same coin. It is the imperialistic plan of destroying the countries in Yemen. They are doing through a terrible bombarding, and in Venezuela they are trying it through economic, financial sanctions that always have the same goal, which is to lead people to famine. This is why it is important to review, we recommend to review the report of World Peace Foundation called Alliance Strategies, the coalition of war in Yemen, where it is proved that that war, or these images we saw, bombs, is specifically against or addressed to the destruction of food, attacks against farmers, peasants, fishermen, and on the urban sector, the processing and distribution and storage of foods. So this is a war that you don't see clearly in those images of taking the population to famine in a planned way, because famine in Yemen is not a collateral damage as sometimes heard. It has been planned. It was planned by imperialism against all the peoples who are trying to struggle for their sovereignty, independence, and to keep a sovereign development. Sometimes when we discuss this topic with another guest, I don't want to name him, and I don't want to give the statements to who didn't say, but I remember that he said that what is being charged to Yemen, that old socialist history. That is an added fact. Of course, it's not the essential one. The essential one is war for the resources, and here we recommend the book of Thomas Clare, who explains this in detail. But it is good to remember that since 1967, one part, the southern part, rich in oil and gas, and as you explained at the beginning of the program, the geostrategic part is important because it controls the strait. And that part was on the way to socialism. There was a revolution that started with a struggle of liberation against the British colony, which is behind this conflict, and almost doesn't appear in the news. And this is some kind of political revenge because it was going towards an independent socialist development. And of course, this in a region where feudalism through kingdoms and sheikhs command. For this reason, we have to join the economic and the energy factor with the political factor that in that world, the struggle of classes is well expressed, as you mentioned, in the struggle of the systems. And this is being established in Yemen, the concept of socialism or barbarian of Rosa Luxemburg, because if we don't achieve socialism, all peoples will live what the Yemeni people is living now. And a territory like Djibouti that privileges military installations since the Cold War, France is also facilitating the naval blockade, and the United States with its military bases with thousands of people deployed there. Yes, these are the imperialistic powers. And as we mentioned, Great Britain, that does not appear, but is behind the conflict. France and Germany, as our Spanish peer said, that with this double standard, they are discussing what measures to take. And they keep the provision of weapons and the complete isolation of the Yemeni people. The international organizations we just mentioned, United Nations and their agencies, have these people abandoned. The UN former General Secretary Ban Ki-moon acknowledged recently that he had accepted several proposals of the Saudi monarchy, saying that accepted that they murdered children, and they would stop financing that situation. And this is very serious because it shows how this works. It is the clear policy of the U.S. president that reaffirms the fact that or the organizations that do not subject to imperialistic policy will be definanced and also assaulted. The topic of the approach of the policy of the United States is not to have any illusion of change, but if the American people does not raise, it's the figure of James Schlesinger, who and the administration of Richard Nixon was the Secretary of Defense, and in the government, the administration of Jimmy Carter, allegedly considered positive, was the Secretary of Energy. So it was the same man with two administrations that were different, had two functions. Now, Schlesinger, why did they choose Schlesinger? Because he is expert in energy? No, he is expert in war. So in the U.S. politics, when they want to control energy sources, and this implies war, it's automatic. James Schlesinger also said that for the United States, it is much easier to make a war in the Middle East than to correct their energy policy in their own country. They won't save energy, and this is why they left all treaties. preservation of nature. That they don't care. Capitalism, U.S. capitalism doesn't care about that. But the search of energy sources, energy resources, oil, gas especially, and naturally, Venezuela is on the target. Is there any actor in the world that can influence and revert the situation? We must all be actors, but undoubtedly the region we were just mentioning, where Yemen plays an important role, is part of the Belt and the Silk Route that is currently proposing the Popular Republic of China, that seeks to unite through trade the different continents, and in this sense it's going to be one of the, together with Russia, of course, next to Iran and Africa, it's to the side, and of course on the side of Latin America. The world is pluripolar. It is the policy of the commander Hugo Chavez Farias that is clarified in these disasters and crimes we see every day. And for this reason, the unity of democratic progressive forces must continue versus huge threats that now is in Yemen, tomorrow it could be Venezuela or Brazil. Has Saudi Arabia achieved the goals next to the Western powers? Of course no, because the people is struggling. There is resistance, and thanks to Telesur, we must mention it, we see those images in Yemen that continues in spite of the most difficult conditions of life, continues organizing, resisting, and imposing the goals, against the goals of Saudi Arabia of total control. And the Yemeni people needs, of course, all our solidarity that starts by getting to know the conflict and acknowledging it, and pointing at the guilty parties, and a close support to the resistance, brave resistance of the Yemeni people. International organizations acknowledge the conflict in the broad sense of the world. There are voices, but in general we can individualize people. There are voices of critique and accusation, but the organizations as a whole, as we said before, are controlled by action or omission by the powers, imperialistic powers, that with a single veto prevent any aids that the governments want to provide to the United Nations. This could be a rhetoric question, but what leads international powers violate international principles, like the principle of self-determination? Why United Nations issues a resolution that demands Saudi Arabia to unblock the passage, that is the port of Quetta, which is so important for the people to feed themselves, and that resolution is not observed. This is why the topic of wars and military powers in the United States, it is the military-industrial complex that governs. It is not the the administration that appears. It's not the Parliament, Congress, or Senate, but what is behind those institutions in the United States, which are the sectors that get rich with wars, that of course want to get richer with the resources of the peoples, and for this reason they are confronting clearly any resistance, popular resistance. On the other hand, of course, we must always see the future in an optimistic way. So as you ask, the great goals have not been achieved, and they won't achieve under dramatic sacrifices of the peoples. They saw how we resisted in Latin America the intentions of the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, that it's not a new edition, it's going to be 200 years that the United States is trying to dominate its backyard and cannot. Of course, naturally, the other regions, for example, the Middle East, and namely Yemen, we are sure that the people will keep their independence and will free that zone, because we saw in its history since the 15th century, I think, the first time there's news they confronted the Portuguese, and the invasions of Arab Ottoman sectors. After that, there was a long time since 1839, I think, to 1967, when it was a British colony. It is similar to Vietnam, that always was always invaded and always was won. Could this win the Saudi monarchy? That is supported by the United States. There are thousands of members of that family, and we must clarify this. There are huge struggles in Saudi Arabia, so we think that monarchy, as all monarchies in the world, have to disappear. Thank you very much for being with us. We have conclusions. Yemen is a war for oil, a fossil, very important geopolitical resource in the world, as an essential enclave in the world, but also the regional control and the attempt of winning over the Republic of Iran. The historic differences inside the country that explains this conflict country makes things worse, but they are a few people that are getting rich with the war, and the situation is not different with that Libya, Syria lived. Regarding international organizations, treaties, and laws, why one government interferes in the decisions of other countries and there is no convention that is complied, and no resolution is observed? This is how we end our critical move today with these questions.